Now on Daf Yud Tesamid Beis, Rabbi Yochanan Daf Chavav is going to tell us that Ein Chatzi Nezek Choluk Lo L'Rshus HaYachid Lo L'Rshus HaRabim, meaning that if there's a chiyuv of Tashlumi Chatzi Nezek, then he's chayiv whether it's in Rishus HaRabim or in Rishus HaYachid. So we see clearly that you're chayiv on Nizkei Tzroros in Rishus HaRabim. So Gemara asks, my love, isn't this a case in Rabbi Yochanan's frame of reference of Itiza Rishus HaRabim, Izika Rishus HaRabim, and it's against Rabbi Zera Lo? The Gemara says, no, Rabbi Yochanan didn't have the intention of telling me that you're chayiv in this case, unless it was Itiza Rishus HaRabim, Izika Rishus HaYachid. Again, we're going into the same whirlwind over and over again. Namely, since the Akira took place with Saram, which as far as Regel is concerned is a Makom P'tur, then even though the Hezek B'fal took place in Rishus HaYachid, nevertheless he should be Patur. Amalei Hadri Bey. So Abzer again emphasizes that he changed his mind and he holds that there's no P'tur for the Baal Behema unless the Hezek itself took place in Rishus HaRabim. But if the Hataza took place in Rishus HaRabim, but the Hezek took place in Rishus HaYachid, you're chayav. Iboy Seima. The Gemara now has another answer to this kash from Rabbi Yochanan, that perhaps we could say that Ki Omer Rabbi Yochanan Keren. Rabbi Yochanan was not even talking about Chatzi Nezek of Tzroros of Regel. He was only referring to Chatzi Nezek of Keren, meaning for Keren Tama. And there's no difference between Rishus HaYachid and Rishus HaRabim when it comes to Keren. You're chayav even in Rishus HaRabim. But as far as Chatzi Nezek Tzroros is concerned, even Rabbi Yochanan would concede that you're part of Rishus HaRabim. Now the Gemara presents another suffix with regard to Nizkei Behema. Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda, Nisiyav, Rabbi Oshaya, Akila on the Knisa to the house of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda Nisiyav. Nafak Milsa ben Einai. In other words, one asked the other the following question. Kishkisha biznava mahu. What's the din of an animal that breaks something by waving its tail? In other words, do we say that that's the derech ha-behema to wave its tail, and therefore this is orche, and therefore he's going to be chayiv only midin regel, and therefore he's poter Rishus HaRabim? Or should we say no? Ein darka lasos kach. This is lav urche, and therefore it's a told of Keren. Amalei idach. So the other one responded by saying, are you telling me that a Baal Behema, when he goes with his animal, he has to hold on to its tail? There's no Chiv Shmira. Why should he be chayav for such a hezek? So the Gemara asks, Hachi Keren Nami Nema Hachi? Why is it that in this case, Keren Rishus HaRabim, we say he's chayav Chatzi Nezek on the first three rounds? What do you expect him to do? You expect him to hold on to the Keren? He's got to grab onto the horns of the animal? So you're going to say, according to your logic, that he didn't violate his Chiv Shmira, and that therefore he should be part of for Keren Rishus HaRabim? That's not so. So the other one answered, Hachi Ashta. There's a difference between the two cases. Keren lav urche. We can't expect the Baal Habayis and demand that he holds on to the Keren of the animal as he walks with the animal through Rishus HaRabim, because the animal is not usually belligerent. But in the case of Kiskis of Biznava, that's normal behavior, Arche. And therefore, we should say that in this case, maybe it's a tolda of Regel and he's part of Rishus HaRabim. If you're of the opinion that it's normal for the animal to be waving its tail and therefore could break things with its tail, so what was the suffix that you raised over here? For sure it's a told of Regel, and therefore be part of Rishus HaRabim. My answer is Kiskus Yisera, by the way. My suffix was about Kiskus Meruba Min Haragil. It was an unusual type of Kiskus. The animal was apparently very upset about something, and it started wagging its tail in all directions. And should we treat that as Mishuna, and therefore it's a told of Keren, he's Chayv Sarab? Should we say no? Sometimes it's anticipated within the framework of normal behavior that the animal might even do a very aggressive kind of kishkus, and therefore it's a told of regel, and therefore it's patur mishusara. Boy Rav Eino kishkish shall be amos ma. So here the animal was waving its private parts. Mi amrina, should we say midi davia keren? What's keren? Keren means that this is not normal behavior of the animal. The Yetzer Hara, so to speak, got a hold of the animal, and all of a sudden the animal started belligerently being nogeya. It's hachinami lo shna. Here too, the Yetzer Hara got the better of the animal, and the animal in its organ got very takif yitzrei, and therefore it's keren. Oh, Dilma, should we say no? This is not similar to keren. Keren kavanas lahazik. The essence of keren is not Yetzer Hara here and Yetzer Hara here. It's kavanas lahazik. But in the case of Mekashkeshes, that's not kavanas lahazik, ain't kavanas lahazik, and therefore it cannot be keren. It has to be shein, and it's patur sh'ram take. The Mishnah says Tarnagola move odim lahalich kidarkot u'lishaber. So it means that it's normal for the animal when it walks to break kalim as it walks, and this is going to be a case of regel. But what happened? Now, the delil, there was a bucket that was tied down to the feet of the tarnagolas, or the animal was mahades and breaking kalim, it pays chatzi nezek. So now the Gemara wants to know what happens if somebody trips on the delil and was injured. Shall we say that this already comes under bar? But actually, who created the bar? It was the Tarnagolas that created the bar. Amar Avhuna, Lo Shanu. When does it say that you pay a chatzi nezek ela shenikshar me elov? In other words, we cannot blame a person for tying down this delil to the foot of the Tarnagolas. Tarnagolas picked it up on its way. Aval ksharo baile adam. If a person, a human being, came along and he tied down a pail to the foot of the Tarnagolas, chayav, the one who tied it down is chayav to pay nezek, meaning nezek shalom, because of bar. Bar in Rishus Harabim is chayav for nezek shalom. So Gemara clarifies. Nikshar me elov man chayav. Who are you going to be machayev in the case of nikshar me elov? In other words, for the chatzi nezek. Ilema balad delil. If you're going to tell me the balad delil is chayav, but it was a case of nikshar had delil me elov, so why would the balad delil be chayav? Hechi dami ida it's atzni. If he was watching the delil and he put the delil in a makom amishtam, he put it away, and nevertheless the Tarnagolas got a hold of it, is anusu. He's not responsible for that. Why would he have to pay a dime? Ve'ilo atzne, if he left it in a makom sheina mishtamer, is posheahu, and therefore he should pay the full nezek. It's boro that was mazik, and the Mishnah says he only pays chatzi nezek. Ella, we have no choice but to say that chayav bala tarnagol. The bala tarnagol is chayav. So then, wait a second. If the bala hatarnagol is chayav because he created this takola, is maishna kuli nezek delo? Why is he only paying chatzi nezek? Oh, so you're going to have to activate the following drasha. You're not chayav for your animal that created a bar. No, if that be the case, chatzi nezek nami lo yishalim. Ish bar v'lo shar bar. Ella masnisin beraduye aduye. The Mishnah is talking about a scenario in which the Tarnagolas chucked the pail and broke kalim. And now we come to Nizkei Tzoros. And Rav Huna's statement of kosher adam versus kosher me'elav is not referring to our Mishnah per se, but rather was a separate independent statement. That's called the Alma Itmar. And he was telling us and formulating the rule, Rav Huna, that if a tarnagol was kosher biraglo dlil hefker, the dlil doesn't belong to anyone, it's hefker, is then Amar Rav Huna nikshar me'elav potter, the balatarnagolis is potter if he wasn't responsible for tying it down. But kshara adam, if it was tied down through human intervention, chayav, the kosher has to pay a full tashlumin because it's a bar shehizik. Now, even though the bar in this case is hefker, the delil is hefker, nevertheless, at the time that he tied it down to the regular behema, he picked it up, and it was konami din hagba, and therefore it's his, and he's chayav in his zakov. That's how Rashi learns this sugya. Tosa is not happy because he felt that Rashi didn't have to say that he was kona through the hagba, because the din is kol takol shadam einiach b'shurabim arei mischayav in his kel midin bar. Afal pichol zochaba, even if he wasn't zocha. So Tosas concludes that you don't have to be kona the dlil, and even if you didn't tie it down before, so there was no agba, but garo, which is not a kinyan agba, mi mokum mutzna, and iniach b'mokum golui chayav v'chol anezikin. So Gemara asks me, Shemai chayav? Why is the kosher chayav? You're going to tell me mishum bar. Well, wait a second. Where did the hezek take place? The hezek didn't take place in that location where this person tied down the talil to the tarnagol. The tarnagoles carried the talil from one place to another. And the Gemara answers, Rav Huna bar Manoach, why is the kosher chayav even in this case? Mishum bara misgalgel b'ragli adam. This is the sugi that we learned back on Daf Yud. A bar that was misgalgel through a person who kicked the bar, or an animal that kicked the bar, then the person who put down the dlil is chayav. Why? Because he put down a takol b'shus harabim, and he's chayav in his bar, even if the bar was not mazik in this location, but rather in his galgal makom acher b'ragli odom b'ragli hema, and it was mazik there. And this leads us to the Mishnah of Ketzad. Ketzad hashen mu'edes lechol es haroilo. When do we consider shein as mu'ad? When it eats something that's royal. And we'll see later on there's something that's not royal. Habehema mu'edis lechol peros v'yirokos. An animal will normally eat peros and yirokos, that's called royal, and therefore the animal is considered mu'ad, and it pays nezek shalom for shein. But ochlok suso kalim, this already ain't a royal. Normally an animal doesn't eat garments or vessels. Mishal mechatzi nezek, this becomes a tolda of keren. Amedvar mamur b'shus hanizak, aval b'shus harabim potu. Okay. So this is the p'tur of shein b'shus harabim, because it says ubir b'stei acher and not in b'shus harabim. Now, later on Daf Chaf, we're going to have Machlokas Amoraim, where the Mishnah says that he's potter Rishus Harabim even in the case where he ate ksus and kalim, which l'chora should come under Keren and should be chayav in Rishus Harabim, or only be ofen she'achla davar royla, because then it's regel, I should say shein, and shein is potter Rishus Harabim. So that's going to be a machlokas between Rav and Shmuel. Rav is of the opinion that he's potter Rishus Harabim in all cases, even if the animal ate ksus v'kelim. And that's based on a principle that Rav formulates called kol hameshanu bo acher v'shina bo potter. So the person who puts the ksus down or Kalim down in Rosh Hashanah, he was Shanaba. He deviated from the normal minog, and therefore the Baal Behema is pot. But Shmuel holds that if the Behema ate in Rosh Hashanah, but it was if it was Dvarim Haroila, it's pot mishum shein. But if it eats Ksus or Kalim, that's Mishuna, that's a told of Karen, Yechayv and Rosh Hashanah. So that's going to be a Mitzvah Shem tomorrow's Sugya on Daf Cha, just previews of coming attractions. Pamed, yeah. Im nenes, Mishalemis Mashen nenes. Right now, what we're talking about is a case where the Nizak is potur because the Achila took place in Rosh Hashanah, and we're talking about Shein Rosh Hashanah is potur, but nevertheless, the animal saved itself dinner that night. And therefore, the Baal HaBehemoth that let's say 8 peros or yerokos in Rosh Hashanah has to pay at least the amount of Hana. We'll have a whole sugi exactly. The Mishnah touches on it, how much he has to pay. So that's called the Shukei Ha'ir. Is Meshalemis Mashen Nenes. So it's Shein B'Rishus HaRabim. But Achla Mitzidei Arachava, Meshalemis Mashi Zika. Okay, this is already Dover Mishuna, and therefore it's a told of Karen, and he pays B'Rishus. Karen is Chayiv B'Rishus HaRabim, and he pays according to the Hezek that was incurred. But again, you have to say Chatzi Nezek here because we're talking about a told of Karen. Haraya you're Chayiv B'Rishus HaRabim. Now, another case is in the Mishnah, the animal ate me Pesach HaChanus, Mishalemis Mashen Nenes. So this is Shein B'Rishus HaRabim, and Shein B'Rishus HaRabim you don't pay Mashe Zika, but Mashen Nenes. But if it ate me Toch HaChanus, Mishalemis Mashe Zika, because that's already Karen. So Gemara says, Tana Rabbanon, Hashem Mu'edes Lechos Haroy Lo Ketzad, Be'ema Shenichnas Ol Chatzar Nizak, so this is Darkam Liochlam, and it's in the Rishus HaNizak, or Vishos Mashkin or Uyum Mishalem Nezek Shalem. So the Baal HaBeima pays Nezek Shalem because this is Shein Rishus HaNizak. V'chein Chaya Shenichnas Ol Chatz HaNizak v'Torf HaBeima Ochla Basar, that's normal, and therefore you pay for Shein, and it's in the Rishus HaNizak, is therefore Mishalem Nezek Shalem. Uparasha ochlasi orin. Now, normally saorin is Michael Chamor. It's not. You don't give barley to a cow. V'chamor ochal karshinin. What do we feed to a cow? We feed it karshinin, and here the chamor ate the karshinin, or kelev shaliklek es hashemen. So this is again something that's, I guess, it's kedarko b'shas hadchak, or chazir sha'ochal chaticha shel basar. In all these cases, mishal menezek shalom idin shein. In the chotzar nizak, right? We have to emphasize chotzar nizak, of course. And this is called Kidarko B'Shas Hadchak. And the Mishnah, or the Gemara, I should say, is holding now that Achila B'Shas Hadchak Shmei Achila, and therefore you chai midin shein, and you pay Nezek Sholem B'Rishus HaNizak. Amar Papa Hashta di Amrit Kol Midi de Lav Urche. We've already established in the Brisa that if it eats something that's not derech bali chaim to eat, like we spoke about kelim and ksus, but if b'shas adchak, even though normally it wouldn't eat it, shmei achila, it's considered achila, and he's chayav mishum shein in Rishus HaNizak, is hay shunra di ochel tamre. Normally, a cat doesn't eat dates. Vechamra a chamor di ochel binse, which is a dag, a fish, is mishalig nezik sholim, because this is darko lechol b'shasat chag. Ahu chamra, there was a story of a donkey, the ochel nama, it ate bread. The bread was inside a basket, upalse l'sala, and it started chewing up on the sal, where the lechem was. Is chayve Rabbi Yehuda l'shal nezik sholim anama v'asal chatzi nezik. So as far as the lechem is concerned, that's called shein, and that's darko bakach. But in the case of le'isas asal, that's already ein derech b'le'isas salim. That's meshuna lav urche, and therefore he's chayv mishum keren. So he only pays chatzi nezik. Frek the Gemara of Hamai came at the orche lemechol nahama orche nami lefalusei sala. Once the donkey is eating the bread from inside the sal, then it's normal and anticipated that it would also chew up the sal. And the Gemara says the ochel v'hodar palis. In that particular circumstance, the chamor ate the lechem, and then only afterwards it began to chew up the sal. That's not darko, that's meshuna. And usually it would start eating the sal and then get to the lechem. So therefore, Rabbi Yehuda says you only pay chatzi nezik mishum keren. Frek the Gemara pas orchehu. Are you going to tell me that a donkey normally eats bread? Or a minu? I'll ask you kasha from my brisa. The brisa says ochla pas ubasa v'savshil is mishalim chatzi nezek. If the animal eats bread and meat and a cooked food, then you pay like keren, chatzi nezek my lab v'behema, and we assume that a behema doesn't usually eat bread, and a chamor is a behema, so therefore, why did Rabbi Yehuda say he pays nezek shalav? He should only pay chatzi nezek as a short time. Gemara rejects it, lo bechaya. The Bryce is not talking about a behema. Chamor is not included. It's only talking about a chaya. And in the case of a chaya, the chaya will eat pas, basar, tavshil. I'm sorry, just one second. I skipped a line here in the Gemara. I say, el lo bechaya. In a case of a chaya doesn't eat bread, but a behema, including a chamor, would eat bread. Frek the Gemara, b'chaya basar urchehu. If we're talking about a chaya, does the chaya eat basar? And Gemara answers the mitveh. In a case where it was roasted, so the Gemara asks. I read it with a question mark. Forget about the inflection of a question. Basar or chehu. It's darko lechol basar. So why should it pay chatzi nezek? And the Gemara answers because it was roasted basar. And a chaya doesn't eat roasted basar. A chaya eats raw meat. Ibai seima. Or you could explain the price in a different way. We're not talking about a regular chaya, but rather B'tivya. Tivya is a deer. And a deer doesn't eat basar, it doesn't eat lechem. So we are explaining the Bryce is talking about a behema, but it's a situation in which the lechem is on top of a table. And a behema doesn't eat lechem, doesn't eat the bread on top of a table, therefore it's meshuna, and therefore it's keren, and therefore he pays Chaitzi nezek. Okay, then. So tomorrow, Mr. Shem, we'll do daf. Thank you so much.